Cheers is filmed before a live studio audience.
Hey, come and knock on our door.
Oh, yeah. Yes. You know what time it is.
Boom shakalaka!
Raptors Republic. Time to call the doctor, son.
The doctor is in.
Phdsteve. The doc's talking rap stats and who facts like it's Christmas. Dropping points and making specs that you won't be. Man, get ready to ball. Cause he's talking hoop, he's got the scoop. Cutting right through the hoop, give you the loop. With a hoop, his brain's big spout the size of Ben Wallace's. On Raps Republic and a tune, so click and read. Ooh, drop your pants and cough. Cause the doc is in, so let's begin. Affiliate to ESPN.
It's Rapcast with Phdsteve on Raptors Republic.
Ooh, doctor.
Yes, it's me, it's Phdsteve back again with another episode of The Doctor is In here on Raptors Republic, the ESPN.com True Hoop affiliate. And we are now talking about the finals. 2 games into the NBA Finals, I've reassembled the worldwide roundtable, and I have all the members of the roundtable with me today. We're going to take a look at what's happened in Toronto, foreshadow what to expect perhaps in Golden State over the next couple of games, and just talk about some of the big themes and storylines going on. So let's take a look at the worldwide roundtable and see who we have. I'm coming to you live from the capital of Australia, Canberra. All the way across the sea, across the ocean is my brother Mike, and he's at the Louisiana-Texas border. Mike, how are you?
He ain't heavy. He's my brother.
I'm doing good. I'm, as excited, nervous, and upset, as well as, pleased by the Raptors as I guess you could be. I have a mix of emotions.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to summarize how most people are feeling, but we'll go through some of those emotions shortly. Also with us, so let's bounce actually to Toronto, the only member of the Worldwide Roundtable who is north of the border in Canada. He's from the Fifth Quarter blog. He's Blair Miller. Blair, how you doing?
Yeah, boy!
Oh, yeah. What time is it? I'm doing really good.
Okay, and adding to our list today, absent from our last podcast, but welcome back, the prophet, the brain from the south, #pig farmers. He is Greg Mason, and Greg, how you doing?
Being a genius certainly has its advantages.
I'm doing great, reporting in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
I was going to let you give out the good news. The good news and the big news is that you're no longer located in Gainesville, Florida. You gave up your cushy job at the university, but for a new life in Philly. Quick question: have you turned into an asshole yet? Now that you're living in Philly,
I find myself swearing more, to be honest. Dude, the other day I was at there's a cafeteria at my work, and the sweet cafeteria woman in her 60s casually dropped the F-bomb. And I was like, I know I'm in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the best story, right? They boo Santa Claus in Philadelphia, right? So it must have been actually. Maybe we'll start there because I want to get feelings on everyone's feelings about the Raptors so far, the Golden State so far, the series so far. But you were actually you've been living the other side. You were in Philly for the Philly series. What was the mood like? Yeah, what was the mood like at that point in time around this Raptors team? And the reason why I say that, Greg, to you is because I think the Raptors team we saw in the third and fourth quarter of Game 2 looked an awful lot more like the Raptors team we saw in the Philly series than the Milwaukee series. So what was the Philadelphians' viewpoint of this Raptors team while that series was going on?
I think they thought it was a series they should have won, but at the same time, Philadelphia fan base is so up and down. It's like when they win, they're really enthusiastic about the future. When they lose, it's like the world is terrible. Everything's garbage. I don't know.
Santa Claus sucks. Yeah.
You're not gonna hear a lot of positive things about Toronto, if that's what you're asking. I think they thought they were a formidable foe, but it was a series that was theirs to take, and they lost it. And it was definitely, Philadelphia fans are legit basketball fans. Like, you hear people talking about the Sixers just around all the time, and they actually know the players on the team and the players on the other team and things like that. So after that shot, there was actually, after the Kawhi shot, the next morning at work, there was a sort of a weird somberness around the office. So it was interesting to see from that perspective, the actually get to witness the heartbreak from the perspective of the Philadelphia fans. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, let's take a look then now at the series that we're in. Raptors and Golden State go back to Oracle, tied 1-1. The point that I've been making on social media and to others is, before the series started, if you told the Raptors and Raptors fans that they could go to Golden State tied 1-1, every Raptors fan would take it 10 out of 10 times. If you told Golden State fans and the organization that they would be going back to Oracle tied 1-1, they'd be saying, what's wrong with our team? Because I think the perspective going in was, I know Vegas had it, whatever. Raptors were 1-point favorites because they were at home and no Kevin Durant. But I think everybody collectively felt that this Golden State Warriors team was a lot better than the Toronto Raptors team. So we're 1-1. We're going back to Golden State. What's our mood around the Toronto Raptors right now? How do we feel about the Toronto Raptors? Let's go to you, Blair, first. What are your thoughts on the Raptors, where they stand right now, tied 1-1?
Well, let me just say, to backpack on Greg, since I have the only Toronto perspective, obviously it's crazy here in the city, we know. But I actually kind of underestimated it. You really do need to see it firsthand. I went down to a concert Saturday night. Anderson .Paak, I don't know if you guys know who that is. He's a big Grammy-winning artist. He's unbelievable.
I've seen him live, my friend.
He is an amazing performer. He is a showman. The guy, just as a quick blurb, Steve, you'd appreciate this. The guy sings and raps very fast, and he's playing a full drum kit.
Wow.
So on the way down to the concert, I digress. Anywhere there were flags, and many times where there weren't, there was also a Raptors flag. Like it was almost like some sort of dystopian city, you know, like just flags, Raptors flags everywhere. And we were at the concert, and in between almost every song, "Let's Go Raptors" chants would break out.
Wow.
At a concert.
Wow.
I've never experienced that before.
That's cool.
And then there was a great part when he came out playing to the crowd, and it went dark, and he came out again. He's on the drum kit, and he's wearing a Kyle Lowry jersey, and the place went nuts. So the whole city, it's something else. But I still don't think I'm happy if I'm the Raptors, because I still think you have to be objective about this and think you lost home court. Right? Because that's what you want to do, is you want to hold home court. And any team that takes one of the first two games is thinking, great, now we're in the driver's seat. We took home court. So I don't know that I can be that happy, especially because, and I liked how you referred to the Philly series, Steve, because last game 2 felt very much like, I don't want to say a regress, but it felt more like the Philly series than the Bucks series, like you said. And meaning that they weren't hitting the broadside of a barn.
Yeah. Okay, Mike. Well, let's bounce on to you, Mike, and hear your thoughts. How are you feeling about the Raptors at 1-1? You with Blair that it's a disappointment because they've given away home court, or do you think that they should still feel good and comfortable with the fact that they know that they can roll with this Warriors team?
I think if the Raptors are smart and actually want to win this series, they have to be very happy with where they are. You know, the Warriors. You know what? They stole a game in which the Raptors played awful. And the Warriors didn't actually play that much better themselves. And so it's not really like the Warriors were amazing or anything. Like the media down here has been playing it up that the Warriors showed up and they're the greatest thing again since sliced bread. And the Raptors really lost that game that they also should have won. And so you're going into the Warriors arena not sure who you're going to be playing against because they're all banged up, and you've proven through 2 games that, one, you can beat them when everyone's playing well and, you know, blow them out of the gym, and you almost beat them if, you know, a couple more shots drop the other night. You know, that 109-104 is not as bad as it looks. I think the Raptors should be, really happy going forward. Right? They should be upset that they lost that game. Don't get me wrong. Like, they should be up 2-0. But to not only beat Golden State, but to really show how vulnerable Golden State is, I think that they're sitting in a really good spot. They cannot let this hang over them like a cloud, you know.
Yeah, Greg, before Iguodala makes that three-pointer, Golden State had gone, I think, 5 minutes without a field goal. And in that same time,
Iguodala was 0 for 11 or something of his last 11 three-pointers up until that game. He hit two three-pointers this last game.
He hadn't hit one since the Portland series.
And
I think it was before that. I think it was the second round. I think he hadn't hit one since game 2 of the Houston series. Like
really?
If anybody was going to take a 3-point shot, like you were like, okay, well, Iguodala can take that. That's an ill-timed shot. He's not shooting very well. And you know what? If Kawhi steals that ball, which he almost did before, my goodness, or they called a foul on him bumping into. It's one of those, like the Raptors had that game, and it just ended up being, lucky. I feel like Golden State just got lucky to take that game and walk out of there, and they are hobbled like a wounded animal right now. Is how I feel.
Let's pass to Greg though. Greg, before that, like we said, before that the shot goes down, to go a 5-minute stretch, Golden State doesn't really get a basket. In that same time, Toronto almost scores nothing themselves through that 5 minutes, other than basically Kawhi Leonard at the free throw line. Table that with a 26-4 run to end the second quarter and start the third quarter, and what we see is the Raptors go through two really abysmal stretches in that game, and yet when the final whistle blows, final score is only 5 points, and with 10 seconds to go, we're in a one-possession game, and really it could have gone either way. So how do you think? What are your thoughts on the Raptors at this point at 1-1? Are they in a good spot, or should they be concerned that they've given away home court?
I think they've proven to themselves that they're not just tourists in this whole thing. It's not just we made it. This is a great story. It's great for the city. We're happy to be here, but really, there's some real possibility here to win this thing, and they've proven to do some things defensively that are effective to slow down Steph Curry and make life challenging for the Warriors, which most teams can't even get that far. So that's been really great. So I think they've proven to themselves that, hey, we're a pretty formidable contender here, and that's really positive for me. And there's also a lot of things there's a lot of correctable things and things like that they can point to for the next couple of games. So I don't know. It's positive, and it's not like they didn't get good shots and just miss them last night. So even last night, it's not like you're feeling in despair after that game or anything like that. And I think Kawhi is definitely the quiet leader on this team in terms of he's been there, done that, and his whole philosophy is one game at a time, because he's actually lived that out. And I think he's sort of he's passing on that never too high, never too low vibe onto the team, and that's really important for them moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like he's the Bill Belichick of the NBA, right? He's like the player version of Bill Belichick. Like every question you ask him, it's like, we're looking at next week's game. We're on to the next opponent. We're on to nothing moves him,
I tweeted last night that he had to leave because there clearly wasn't enough room for him and Popovich in the media room in San Antonio.
But he doesn't. He's not just. I don't think that's BS for him. I think that's really the way he approaches it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes him the Terminator, the cold-blooded killer that Mike was talking about in the last podcast. Is there's never a moment where his approach to the game changes. So it's always every play, every minute, every second of every game, it's exactly the same. And you would say, well, you ramp it up in the playoffs, you ramp it up the last 2 minutes. No, he just plays every possession like it's the only possession that matters, because it's the only one that's directly in front of him that he can control. And that's part of what makes him such a great player, I think, on both ends of the court. Let's talk then about Golden State now. They're the champs. We know that. They're historically one of the best teams we've ever seen. They are clearly the best team of our generation. They are playing for history, and they're, as Mike talked about in the last podcast, playing maybe from a bit of a fatigued spot, right? In that, trying to get that third and the three-peat can be very difficult. Some bodies are the same, some are different. We're going to talk about that in a second. But what is really impressive is that win of Game 2. That's the 23rd straight playoff series they've been in that they've won an away game. So you kind of knew they were going to get one at some point. So my question again, going back to we know it's 1-1. How do you feel about the Warriors? How do you feel about the Raptors? Let's look about how you feel about about the Warriors. Okay, 23 straight series they get that road win. Now they've taken back home court advantage. Is that big news? Is that little news, or is that no news at all? Blair, to you.
Well, as I said before, I do think it's significant news because based backpacking on what I said before, that the Raptors shouldn't be happy. I want to give the Raptors respect and just treat them like any good contender there can be, because that's what they are. And because of that, I don't think they're happy. I don't think they want to be happy. They lost home court advantage, and it's a big win for Golden State to take it. And what they also did was continue the psychological domination of opponents, because what the stat I have here, over the last three postseasons, Golden State's trailed at the halftime of 20 playoff games. And of those 20, they've come back to win 11, 55% of those games. And you're just not supposed to have a winning record in games you trail at halftime, especially in the playoffs like that. And I think there was a graphic came up in game 2. They were down to Portland the last three or four games of that series. And then they were down the last 2 of these. And so not only do I think it's a big win because they took home court advantage back, and again, we also need to see how the injuries play out and all this other stuff. They are hobbled, that's for sure. Mike's right. But now it's not just we took home court. It's now you can have whatever lead you want. You're still going to be nervous. We still have you.
Yeah, but we said going into the series, one of the talking points in the last podcast was just that. The thing with Golden State is, when we know this about them,
but
there's no lead that's safe with them. There is no lead that's safe with them. Even if Steph doesn't have a bucket for the first 18 minutes, and in the final 4 minutes of the second half, he puts in whatever 6 points, 8 points, 10 points, and just boom, 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 and before you know it, now here they come. This is who they are. This is their actual identity.
This is who they are, and Siakam pointed it out post game after game 2 last night. Was he put it on them because this is who they are, and we came out and we didn't respect that in the third quarter and let them blow us out.
Yeah, good. Excellent point. Okay, Mike, to you. What are your thoughts? Big news, little news, no news at all. Golden State, again, taking back home court and getting a game on the road.
I think that's actually only big news if they win the next 2 games, right? That changes the whole series around. But I think they have to be worried. For the Raptors. Again, Golden State has to win. If they win all the home games, they win the championship. But it's not like the Raptors haven't won any games on the road this postseason, right? They've already shown that they can win games on the road and big games on the road too. So I think it's big news for Golden State because it at least gives them a shot in the arm. But this is a team that hasn't looked good. And if you go over all of those postseason, victories the last couple of years that Blair has been pointing out, they did all of that with Kevin Durant, and they don't have him. They don't have Kevin Durant. They might not have Klay Thompson. They probably won't have Kevon Looney. So there's a lot of banged up bodies there. You have a Curry who's not shooting the same. He's definitely not scoring at the same pace that he was before. And you have the Raptors lost that game with a really poor shooting effort by the Raptors, and everybody shot poorly with the exception of Kawhi Leonard. So I think the Warriors should be happy, and it's big news in that regard. But I think it's going to feel like little news if the Raptors come into their arena and win one of those next 2 games. So I think it's only big news if they win the next 2 games, right? Because then that puts the Raptors in a really terrible position.
Okay, what about you, Greg? We've seen the Raptors win at Oracle already this season. They won the game they played at Oracle earlier this year, and if I'm correct, I don't think Kawhi Leonard even played in that game as well. So, what do you think, Greg, about the Raptors traveling to Golden State and Golden State themselves? Again, they got their road win. Big news, little news, or no news at all?
I think it is indicative of kind of playoff basketball in the sense that the more you've been there and done that, the more you have that kind of quiet confidence to just know how to win in the playoffs. And that's the really challenging thing about the Warriors at this point, above and beyond just the pure talent they have on the roster. Is just, they've figured out how to win time and time again in so many different playoff basketball situations at this point. So it's certainly no surprise whatsoever that they won. Is Jeopardy a thing? Is that a thing they show in Canada?
Yeah.
I mean, Alex Trebek is Canadian, so I assume. Yes, no, I don't know.
I was, for what it's worth, I was just in the grocery store today, and there was a Canadian magazine, Maclean's, and he was on the cover. So.
All right. So, I kind of compare the Warriors to James Holzhauser or vice versa a little bit. There's a lot of talented people that come in every night you get on the show. There's a talent, everybody's pretty talented, but he's been there so many times at this point. He knows exactly how to ring the buzzer. He knows exactly how to bet. He knows exactly how to. The Warriors are the exact same thing. They're just a well-oiled machine, and that's why injuries and things like that are a little less significant to the Warriors than they are, just because they're so battle tested, and they just have these little insights and little sort of experiential confidence that other teams you can't have, because how can you replicate that? So that's the tough thing. But at the end of the day, I'm really excited about where the Raptors were, and I think Nick Nurse and company has been really smart with how they've game planned for this series so far. And I'm really hopeful that it's not a surprise. It's expected that they were going to maybe bounce back and find a way to win, and resilience, grittiness, blah 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 blah. But I don't think it's any doom and gloom on the series at all. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Raptors won in Golden State one of the next two games.
Yeah, I'm going to say that they're going to win one. I can't see Golden State winning 3 of the remaining 5 games. We'll get to that as we go on. A couple just points of note. I know that there's some nerves around going to Oracle and just how difficult Golden State is to beat at Oracle. But Golden State lost 11 games at home this year. They were 30-11 at home. So that's a decent record. But I mean, it's not a place where you go into, you say, oh, they can't be beat at home. And you'll say, yeah, but look what they did to Houston in the playoffs, or Portland in the playoffs. Sure. Again, Portland without their best player, which we talked about in the last podcast. I want you to remind you that in the very first series of this particular playoffs, they played the 8 seed Los Angeles Clippers, and they lost 2 games in that series at Oracle. They lost game 2, and they lost game 5. Well, Clippers, the 8 seed, 1-2 at Oracle. And one of the reasons why that was such a difficult game for Golden State, or that was such a difficult matchup for Golden State versus Portland and or Houston, is, again, I think it's just the nature of how that team is set up to play, and the aggressive nature in which they play, which they were coming at them defensively, which Portland and Houston weren't really as interested in, and I think Toronto's going to give them a lot of trouble. So I think winning 1 of 2 is very reasonable. Even this morning, I was listening to Tim Hardaway on Oakland radio, and he was on talking a little bit about just the nature of the series itself, and the feeling there is, of course, they want to go back 3-1 to Toronto, but no one in Golden State right now is feeling, or no one in the Oakland, San Francisco, Bay Area is feeling like 3-1 unless Durant comes back. No one's feeling good about 3-1 as being an actual thing right now. I think they've seen enough. But let's talk about some of the post-game feelings after the second game. Scott Van Pelt on ESPN post-match immediately following called it a gutsy performance, a big win for the Warriors. Paul Pierce and Chauncey Billups, former players, suggested that it demonstrated just how battle-tested this Warriors team is, just like you were talking about there, Greg. Now, my question for you is, was that a big win for the Warriors? Like, would you agree with the description that win is a big win for them, and that it's an impressive win given the nature of how the game played itself out and the injuries, etc., or is it something else? Let's start with Greg and go the other way this time. Greg, what are your thoughts? An impressive win for Golden State?
It is. It's still impressive. I mean, you have some factors here that are not insignificant. You do have a pretty injured team, no matter how you kind of shake it out, and they lose Klay Thompson at the end there for a decent little stretch down the run. So it's impressive in a sense that, again, just sort of what I touched on before. It's impressive that they know how to find that reserve, and they know how to just, if it's not working for Curry, then Klay Thompson steps up. If Klay Thompson goes down, okay, well, Curry comes up, or blah, 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 blah. So it's impressive in that sense, but like I said, narratives, you got to create narratives for the media, and maybe being a little overblown in the media in terms of, what kind of statement game it was or anything like that. But I do think it's impressive to have an off night like that and have so many guys clearly hurting and to still find a way to win in a really tough arena. So.
Okay, they come out with the win. No Klay Thompson down the stretch, as you mentioned, but there was also no Kyle Lowry down the stretch for Toronto Raptors, which we will talk about. Lowry's fouling out in about 7 or 8 minutes down the road from now. So for those of you who want to hang in, that discussion is coming. Mike, impressive victory for the Golden State Warriors.
No, this wasn't impressive at all, and I'm going to disagree with Greg. I agree that they won the game, so it's important for them, and we talked about why earlier. But was it an impressive win? I'm going to have to say no. And I think it follows the last 6 games that the Warriors have played where they haven't actually looked like the dominant, team that is just blowing people out of the stadium, day after day after day, game after game after game. I think this was a game that the Raptors lost more than Golden State won. The Raptors as a team shot less than 30, or they shot 37%. They shot less than 29% from three-point land. They jacked up 38 and only made 11 shots. Siakam, Gasol, Lowry, and Green were 14 for 43 from the floor. Lowry gets kicked out because of foul trouble, 11 fouls in 2 games. Golden State, their bench collectively were minus figures. Like they didn't actually do, I think, enough to actually help them win. The Raptors had more points in the paint. They had less fouls. They had more fast break points. They had less turnovers, and they forced Golden State to turn it over 16 times. The Raptors, 8 straight shots and 5 turnovers in that massive 18-0 run in the quarter. But the Raptors also, if the Raptors hit shots, they win this game. And I think that's really the difference in this. I don't think anything that Golden State did was actually that impressive, except for that 18-0 run, which should have been stopped. There should have been more timeouts called by Nick Nurse. And that's one of the things that I feel he didn't take seriously enough, was trying to hemorrhage, stop that bleeding, but Steph Curry, that wasn't impressive. Steph Curry scored, nothing in the fourth quarter. Golden State scores nothing from 5:39 to 7 seconds left. And the Raptors were just, they were awful in that regard, right? That second half wasn't a great Raptors performance. And that's why I don't think Golden State was impressive. I think that they made just enough shots to win, and the Raptors actually lost that game.
Well, it's a make or miss league, right? Raptors only get to score 45 points in the second half. And if you take a look at the stats like Mike brought out for you there, the Raptors dominated in every single category except for 3: field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, and the final score. And
assists.
Well, that's right. Well, yeah, exactly. Assist to shots made was pretty impressive for Golden State as well.
Assists were double.
Yeah, and this, I think you're going to talk about this, so I'll let you get onto that, Blair. Let's come to you then. And Mike made an interesting point about Nick Nurse and adjustments. We're going to talk about that a little bit later there, but I do think that, back to Greg's point, which I think is a good one, we saw the experience of a team who's been there before, and a little bit of the inexperience and naivety of a team that was caught up in a bit of a moment there at the start of the third quarter when they weren't able to find their way out of that before the run got to 18. Okay, Blair. So how do you feel then about this victory? Impressive or not impressive?
It's funny because, well, first of all, I totally agree with Mike about needing some timeouts in the third. That was, to note, that they scored 20 unanswered, which is the longest stretch in finals history. So you'd figure a timeout would come there.
It was 14 points before Nick. It was 14-0 run before Nick Nurse called that timeout. 14-0 run. What are you waiting?
I mean, sorry to cut in. Sorry to cut in here, but again, it's Raptors figuring this thing out as they go versus a team that's been through these trials and tribulations before. Yeah. So again, it's impressive. It's impressive that they're right there in it. Coach, organization, players, the whole thing.
Yeah, no, but I would take that same analogy and apply it to the coaching as well. And not to take away from Nurse, he's been doing a great job, but also feeling it out, figuring it out, versus a guy who, if they gave separate awards for the postseason, and for me, Steve Kerr would already have my vote for coach of the postseason. They've used 9 different starting lineups in these playoffs already. And Greg also mentioned something about narrative and how the media likes to find narratives, and we're already starting to see glimpses of it. And it is their team motto, the strength in numbers. And there is some, little interesting irony to what has become what people have been labeling as a less deep, more star-heavy team, right, with Durant and all the cap issues and everything. Now they're starting to piece together, and the bench guys have actually been filling in quite well. And they've been mixing up the lineup. And so back to the original question that Steve asked, the Raptors did, in a sense, give the game away. But it is a make-or-break league. But am I impressed? Hey, your best pure scorer is already out. Your best shooter was clearly sick or something was wrong to start the game. They were all over that. Your best bench player, Looney, leaves the game after getting plowed by Kawhi Leonard. Your best two-way player leaves midway through the fourth in a close game, and he'd been keeping the team in the game in the first half along with the referees, and then they still win? Yeah, that's impressive. I think that's very impressive. That's a lot of adversity to come through against a very good team and eke out a win, as Greg said, in a very tough arena to play.
Well, during that third quarter run, like you were talking about, where it was 18-0 at one point, in addition to eating half a jar of Nutella while I was comfort eating to help myself through that stretch, I also had to go online and just make sure that Lenny Wilkens still wasn't the coach of the Toronto Raptors. Okay.
But he has so many wins in his career.
So we're talking about a team here where guys are stepping up and making shots. And Kawhi had a great game, no doubt about it. And Steph and Clay did enough. I mean, over the first 2 games, Steph and Clay are sort of sitting, where you'd expect them to be. I mean, sure, they can have big nights and explode and destroy you, but they're sitting in their averages, as is Kawhi. The difference, I think, between game 1 and game 2 has just been the supporting cast. And Mike, you mentioned what Siakam and Lowry and Green and Gasol, the remainder of the starting 5, did in game 1, but didn't do in game 2. And I think that's the difference between winning 118-109 and losing 109-104. And then Golden State guys are making shots. So the biggest shot of the game, arguably, is the shot made by Andre Iguodala, that 3-pointer right there. Jalen Rose, I believe, post-match started calling Iguodala the Robert Horry of this generation. And then all day today, I mean, no, that's been a big narrative right now on American radio today. The idea that Iggy is this generation's Robert Horry. So, couple
I love
questions.
That. One shot against how many does Horry have?
Well, that's like Horry won all these championships.
One shot in game 2, and Horry has how many series-winning shots?
So let's talk about this though. But is this a series-changing shot? The Iguodala 3. I mean, is it a series-changing shot? Greg, we'll go to you first.
No. I mean, I think the toughest thing about that shot was how wide open he is. I mean, anyone who's played, I think it's harder when you find yourself that wide open than when you're slightly challenged. So I do give him credit for knocking it down, but I don't know. I don't think it's gonna, create some huge wave of momentum for Golden State or some, terrible feeling for Toronto. Like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to overcome that type of momentum swing or whatever? Yeah, it was an unlikely person and a person who, like we've talked about a little bit. I can't remember if it was before the podcast or on the podcast. Certainly not known for their 3-point shooting, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think people will be thinking too much about the shot other than like the media and the narrative, but I don't think the players are going to be thinking much about that shot at the start of next game, even, let alone 2 games from now.
Let's go to you, Blair. I mean, post-game, Nurse said that's sort of, we're okay with him taking that shot. And then Steph Curry said that he thought it was disrespectful of the Raptors to leave Iguodala that wide open to take that shot. There's a little bit of narrative street there, but also, what do you think of the shot itself going down? Does it change the series?
I think the game might change the series in retrospect, but I don't think that shot necessarily changes the series. I mean, there was still a lot that played out post that shot. And a lot that went into making the situation that had that shot possible. And I would put it this way, not just for the Horry comparison, but the significance in terms of the context of Game 2's win is unless Iguodala goes out and has the next 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 3, 4 games of his life, we're not seeing that highlight in any NBA Finals montage. Whereas Robert Horry has like a plethora of big shot montages.
Mike, I mean, the most people who listen to this podcast will have watched the game in Canada or from Toronto, which means they would have got the Toronto commentators of
not me. You can watch it on ABC. People in Canada, if you know that. You can watch it on ABC here and listen to not Jack Armstrong.
So did you get Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy then, Greg? Or
yes.
Did you get a different? Okay, yes. So you heard Van Gundy after that shot where he was complaining that Iguodala took the shot itself, and that as a coach, it's great that he made that, but there was still enough time for Toronto to have the ball.
That's what I mean. This is not some buzzer beater or whatever. In the context of the whole thing, the shot doesn't really. I don't think it even decides the game per se necessarily, the series.
And Van Gundy was actually upset because if you miss that shot, Toronto has like 6 seconds. They're only stuck at you, and they have their timeout. Whereas if you just take that ball and advance it towards the basket, create some type of contact, or even just eat the clock at that point in time, you win the game.
When he caught it, and I thought he had an awkward moment there, which again to add to what Greg says about hitting an open shot is tough. I thought he had a moment there of, I don't know if hesitation is the right word, but when you're like, if I'm near a guy there, I'll thought too long if he's about to shoot, right? Because I thought he was, and I thought maybe he thought he was going to just start dribbling it down towards the elbow and letting whatever, but he didn't. But I mean, like you said, make or miss.
Okay, let's talk about, I think, what the two, at least in my opinion, the 2 biggest stories after the first 2 games, and the ones that I think will have the biggest impact on the actual outcome of the series are Kyle Lowry and injuries. So let's start with Kyle Lowry first. A really disappointing Game 2 for Kyle Lowry. Again, we're talking about narratives, right? There's been a narrative up until the Milwaukee series of Kyle Lowry in the playoffs, and it hasn't been a positive one for most of his career. And then we saw the Milwaukee series, Lowry really step up and emerge. And I thought in Game 1 and in Game 2 of this series, he hasn't looked great. In Game 1, I thought he was able to overcome some of that by still managing to get, more than half a dozen rebounds and more than half a dozen assists. But in Game 2, to me, the difference between winning and losing the game is Kyle Lowry. And yes, he gets you 13 points. And yes, you can't really complain because Van Vliet gives you 17, so you're still getting incredible production from your point guard. But I mean, 2 assists, 1 rebound. Having to sit on the bench for large stretches because of fouls. Now, some of them were ticky-tacky fouls or whatever. You can say that at least 3 of them were off ball or whatever and shouldn't have been. You can do whatever you want to do.
The last one was unconscionable.
He was like 90 feet away from the basket. He was.
But at the
6th foul is unconscionable. That was ridiculous. No matter what time in the game.
You need him to be dialed in, and if he's not going to give you that second best player on the team, or at worst third best player on the team, I don't know how this team can consider itself NBA champs. Mike, we'll go to you. What are your thoughts on Kyle Lowry's first 2 games, and what are we looking for from Kyle Lowry for the remainder of the series?
Well, if you remember from the last podcast, I had talked about when the trades that Masai had made, and they picked up Gasol, and I said, man, if they had only upped the ante, traded something more, and got Mike Conley, like, wow, what a difference having that type of a point guard who's also dialed in and a good, defender, but longer and bigger. And I'd said, like, look, Lowry so far in that Milwaukee series had done enough maybe to shake that. And I was really happy with what he had done. But these last two games have been, it feels like he's regressed. And it's making me a little bit worried. And, you need Lowry to be dialed in. You can't have him only getting 2 assists. You can't have him being a minus 17 on the floor. You can't have him getting fouled, and being on the bench. You only played 27 minutes. You can't have that sort of thing going on. So this is a concern for the Raptors because, Van Vliet is playing at an elite level right now, and you got to hope that he continues to do that, especially if Lowry is going to play this way, right? Like Van Vliet played like almost 40 minutes in the last game. You need something more from Kyle Lowry. You need him to to take the charges and to continue to grab rebounds, because he should be grabbing more rebounds, but he also should be assisting more. So maybe it's a combined effort that the Raptors just, when you don't make shots, you don't get assists. So maybe that's another problem, when you don't make enough shots in a game. But, I'm starting to worry about Lowry.
He was moved off of his spot early in the game, though. You could see that the couple early fouls he picked up, and I think that changes the type of game that he plays, forces him to be a little less aggressive. But you also mentioned, right, it would be nice to have a little bit more length and defensive ability there, and sort of the lack of depth at the guard position right now is something that we haven't talked about all season, or we haven't because we've been on all season, but I haven't heard a lot about. But certainly, without Danny Green playing like the Danny Green they were hoping to get, and Lowry sort of in this little bit of a funk that he's in, it might be nice to have DeLon Wright now on this squad.
It's
Greg,
still nice to have Gasol, though.
Yes, absolutely. Greg, what are your thoughts on Kyle Lowry through the first 2 games?
Yeah, it is tough with Lowry a little bit. I mean, I totally love him as kind of a person and a leader on the team and a face of the franchise and everything. It's tough seeing him struggle to, penetrate, finish at the rim, be that third scorer that you really need, because Siakam, while very good, I don't know, he's as a playoff number 2 scorer at this level. I just don't know that he's there enough where you can't have a really strong number 3. So it's hurting him a little bit. And I do think he got really pissed off when he he was vertical on that drive that Klay Thompson, I think, in the first quarter, and he got called for a pretty bad foul.
On the open layup, yeah.
And it kind of got in his head, and he wouldn't get over it. And I don't know, it kind of shook him up. And so he was a little off last night. He wasn't as tough mentally as maybe I expect from him. So something for him to work on. But there's definitely certain things about his game that aren't going to be fixed anytime soon. You just got to hope that he is going to take the charges, like Mike said, and do everything he can to be a leader and step up and hit those open threes sometimes. But he's a little bit of a liability in the sense that he's not that third option that you would ideally want. And I think Marc Gasol, maybe this is a different conversation altogether, but I think Marc Gasol needs to kind of recognize that he needs to be a little more assertive in spearheading that offense, since Kyle Lowry has pretty obvious limitations there.
Absolutely. I agree with that point 100%. I thought Marc Gasol yesterday or in game 2 looked extremely tentative, much like the Marc Gasol that we saw in the early parts of the Milwaukee series, right? For example, game 1 and game 2, where just open shots he's giving up to feed the ball to get other people going at times, where when that ball comes to you and you're at the top of the 3-point line and your man is a step away from you, that's your shot. You got to take that. And they need that from him. I also think that Marc Gasol, although although he doesn't bang the same way he used to when he was, a younger center. If they're going to put Boogie Cousins out there and they're going to try and occupy a little bit of space with that big body starting up, especially knowing where he is physically, having come back from that injury. I mean, you got to get in there and smash it around a little bit. To your point of Siakam, I'm going to come to you, Blair. To your point on Siakam, I do think that Siakam could be that second player. I thought in game one, what you saw was a Golden State Warriors team who were not prepared for his speed in real life. I think that they had seen him a little bit, had only played him like a little bit, but weren't actually attuned to how fast he was. And so he made whatever 18 shots or something like that. People go on about the percentage that he hit wasn't sustainable. It's not that. It's that he had that first step on the defender all game long. And I think you saw in game two a little bit of schematic work to sort of to make it just a little bit more difficult for him, push him off of the spots where he wanted to shoot from, and just make things a little bit more contested. And so they were able to scheme a little bit more for him in a way they hadn't before. And I suspect that there will be adjustments coming the other direction for game three, because if you're Nick Nurse, you got to get him going and you got to get him easy looks, particularly in transition, but otherwise you got to get him some easy looks to the basket to get him going. Blair, we'll go to you to Lowry, and then we'll move off of the Raptors for a little bit. Your thoughts on Kyle Lowry?
Just three quick thoughts, kind of building on what each of you has said, and maybe not at some points, but I think for one thing, yes, the fouls were a big issue for Lowry and kept him off the floor a lot, and also affected his game because he is a very risk-taking player. I also think his hand is starting to bother him more and more, his left thumb. And even just body language and tiny little things in the game too, it did seem to bother him a little bit more. He was looking at it more, shaking it more, holding it up to his face. But also, this was, and I didn't mention it in our previous podcast to preview the finals, it just didn't come up, but this was one of maybe the matchup that I thought favored Toronto the least, was Lowry against Golden State, because it's not just the length, and I guess in a way it's in virtue of the length, but Lowry's a physical guy. Like, he's much happier having to get Ben Simmons down and ass him off the block than he is running over top of screens all night for 25, 30 minutes like he's having to do against Golden State. And I think that really frustrates him. It takes him out of his comfort zone, and it affects him on both ends of the floor. If nothing else, it tires him out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He's a very bad matchup to play the Splash Brothers. That game is antithetical to the way he wants to play. He wants to bang you. He doesn't want to run around.
And yet, still traditionally, though, our guard play has been good against Golden State. Over the last couple of seasons, both in how guys like Lowry played against them, but also in how they have contained Steph and Clay consistently. And
but these are the finals, baby. I just think he, part of the frustration Greg noted last night, I think part of the frustration was also because you see it sometimes with other players that aren't nearly as good as Lowry, but it's just because his game's not terribly well suited for it. You give him enough time, and he's running on top of screens all night, and he starts to get annoyed. I don't know who wouldn't.
Okay, let's. And he plays on a line. He's an emotional player. He plays on a line, right? And then you talk about, looking at his thumb, twisting it, turning at his head, huffing and puffing, getting up, getting down. But that same emotion is what makes him Kyle Lowry, right? So when you have to, with players like that, where they walk that fine line, and Draymond Green is another one on the other side. I thought he was going to get teed up a couple times during the game, during game two. They walk that line, and as a coach, you want them to be more reserved just a little bit, because you don't want to give away, you don't want them getting out of their game in their comfort zone. At the same time, as a coach, you don't want to rein that in, because that's who makes them who they are and what they are. Let's talk about Golden State. They have a lot of players right now nursing injuries, no pun intended, and we don't know what they all look like. We don't know if Kevin Durant is coming back at all in game 4, in game 5, if it goes 7. I mean, we don't know. We have no idea what the nature of that injury is, but I think we can all agree that injury and what happens with it has the potential to alter significantly the outcome of this series. Let's talk, though, about the injuries that we do know. We know that Looney got hurt in the game itself, and I had heard that it wasn't that serious. But Greg, as we started recording this, you had mentioned that Woj had tweeted that the injury is serious. What exactly did you get there, Greg?
Broken collarbone and out indefinitely. And he tweeted a follow-up tweet recently that basically said it's pretty hard to imagine that he would be back this season. So, yeah, looks like he's out. And Golden State also just announced that Klay Thompson has a mild hamstring strain, and he's questionable for Game 3.
Okay, so Klay's questionable for Game 3. Looney's gone for the remainder of the season. Durant won't play Game 3. Is still possible hypothetically for Game 4 at the earliest from what we've heard. And I also want to throw into this category Andre Iguodala is nursing an injury that made him at some point questionable for Game 2, although we saw him play the whole game.
He got beat around last night a lot too.
And Boogie Cousins, although he played fantastic minutes, we heard a lot about all that he did in Game 2 for Golden State. That's sort of his first real service back from a very significant injury, and he was back early because when he went out with that muscle tear against the Clippers, the thought was he was probably gone for the season, and now 4 weeks later he's out there giving. I think you said Blair, he played 28 minutes in Game 2. And so now he's supposed to come back and give them even more than that because Looney is now gone. So we're going to see extended Bogut minutes as well. So injuries are piling up. Let's start with you, Mike. What are your thoughts on what this means for Golden State and for Toronto? Game 3, Game 4, and as the series progresses.
I think this is a big deal for both teams. I think it's a big deal for Golden State because again they live by that mantra, right? Like strength in numbers, and now you're being tested. You're going to have to use all of your numbers, right? You're going to have to bring out Bogut and see how much he can actually do, and I think it's going to be difficult for them. And if Klay is not going to play and Steph Curry is the main sort of threat, you're going to see a lot more, this is the strength that Golden State has had is like, well, you can't double anybody because if you double somebody, one of our great shooters is going to be open. But now there's only one of the really great shooters left, right? And if Steph Curry is the only guy out there, you can double him and force the rest of the team like the Raptors did in that fourth quarter when they came out with that box one defense where they said anybody else can try to beat us, and they couldn't score. And so, I think that really should be worrying to Golden State. This is a big deal, especially if none of these guys can go Game 3 or Game 4. And if you're banged up and hurting, this is the Raptors' chance. If you can't be, you got to come into this ready to just strike. You should be able to beat this team when they're this hobbled. They are a wounded animal.
Okay, Blair, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it might turn into a war of attrition, which would be unfortunate because you always want to see, fair, healthy contests. But I don't know. I think Klay will play. Not just because of the Kerr joke when he said he'll be fine, even though he'd say that if he was half dead. But I don't know how serious a hamstring injury can really be when you're allowed to walk out strapped with ice on halfway down the hallway to start greeting the players and congratulating them when they come off the floor. It couldn't have been that bad. Mind you, he's also got to guard Kawhi Leonard, and that can be really hard on your hamstrings. And it can be really hard on your collarbone if you ask Kevin Looney. I still can't believe it. We were saying this before the recording. Like, Leonard just goes in, and it's just like one of those casual, you strip me fouls. And Looney goes flying, almost hits the stanchion, and now he's done for the year. Wow. That's like some Ron Artest type of strength, That's crazy. But the Boogie thing, it's interesting you bring that up, Steve. I hadn't considered the Boogie's, fatigue setting in and everything like that. It might. But I also think he's going to get even more minutes now. If he's healthy enough, soreness, there's a big difference, right? And a very big, important, and sometimes hard to tell difference, even for the medical staff, between soreness and some sort of realm of risk. And I think he's going to be more in the soreness realm. And you mentioned Gasol earlier, and Gasol being tentative, and I think a lot of Gasol's play was thrown off because we talked about last episode how fungible the rounds have been and how the schemes have been. When was the last time Gasol got banged in the chest repeatedly on and off the ball like Boogie was doing by a guy that size, right? Like, let's not forget, yes, he's hobbled, yes, he's whatever. Don't forget who Boogie is, right? For all his baggage and the Achilles injury, I mean, this is a bigger built unicorn.
Yeah, he beat up his bus driver in high school. He's not afraid to take on bigger people.
And let's say he treated Gasol like a bus driver, and you could see Gasol. Well, they kept ringing the bell.
Quote of the podcast.
You can see Gasol huffing and puffing because, like, a guy that big slamming into you like Boogie knows he can with his leverage. And Gasol really got tired out by that a lot, I think. Like, that was, the term body blows. Like, Boogie was feeding him body blows all night. And Gasol's been inconsistent to begin with. So I think he's going to get used more. But, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. I talked about how good Kerr's been with the adjustments, but they are getting stretched thin. Like, what's the term from Lord of the Rings? Like, butter on toast. Like, they are if Clay can't play, it's going to be tough. But I'll tell you, I'm not worried about the boxing one. I think it took Kerr off guard, and they did a little bit one of their Warriors too complacent things and almost lost the game. But one thing Kerr did that was really smart is he's finally started using Curry as a screener to free him up, and Toronto wasn't ready for that. I might say more about that later. But he finally started using Curry as a screener, and that's the easiest thing. If they come out with the box and one, I almost think Nurse should be very careful to come out and not take fool's gold for how well the box and one worked for the last 5 minutes of that game. Because if they come out in the box and one and Kerr sticks with that plan that they got away from near the end of the game and uses Curry as a screener, that box and one is going to get blown apart.
Okay, and this is what we know about Kerr even from so far in this series is once he gets something on film, he's not afraid to adjust to it. And the boxing one is now the big term. Everyone's liking to throw it all around, but I don't think anybody would have even known what that was if Van Gundy hadn't first started talking about it. As he was talking about it, I'm pretty sure Mark Jackson was Googling boxing one to try and figure out what he was even saying.
And upset that he never used it as a coach himself.
He's like boxing, and then the best line was when Van Gundy said, I don't think I've ever seen that before in the professional level. It's like, okay, there you go. Blair, I'm sorry,
like,
Greg.
Because you work for Pat Riley.
Greg, I want to come to you, and I want to give you a chance to speak on Thompson. But I think maybe you can add that to your answer as we talk about adjustments, because this is where we're at now. There needs to be adjustments, and both teams are going to look to make them. Blair had mentioned the idea of using Curry to set screens, and I want to add to that the injury situation means that the ability to set screens is going to be difficult for Golden State across their team, which is a very big part of their game. Using Boogie to set screens is going to be difficult. Using Clay to set screens is going to be difficult. Iggy is hurt. Using him to set screens is difficult. And so if the Raptors start running hard through screens, it's going to be challenging for Golden State to run the offense that they want to run. And with that, I would say, given what we know about Boogie Cousins and his return from injury, if I'm Nick Nurse, the big adjustment that I'm making is I'm going with a starting lineup that includes Ibaka and Siakam. And I'm forcing Boogie Cousins to play with speed, which we know he's not going to be able to do consistently. And I start to push the pace on this Golden State team and force them to really try and adapt and adjust to us. I turned it into maybe a little bit of a track meet. Greg, what do you think needs to happen now, and take into consideration the injuries, but also adjustments for both teams?
I think, well, one quick point about the injuries. I think from a fan perspective and a basketball, perspective, it will be interesting to see what the actual threshold is for Golden State in terms of how whittled down can they get where they just are no longer that dominant force. So I think that's going to be interesting from a fan perspective. Like, okay, they don't have KD. They barely bat an eye. But if at some point they're going to hit that threshold where it's like, okay, this is really significant that they're so injured. So that'll be interesting to see. In terms of adjustments, I think playing off of the fact that Golden State is hobbled and they're injured, the big thing that Toronto needs to figure out how to avoid is not bailing them out so much, not allowing them to stay in the game when they're, stepping on their throat in every other sense of the game by letting them get to the foul line 20 times, So I think that will be a huge thing for Toronto over the next couple is not letting them hang around by sending them to the free throw line when they're crushing them in every other sense. So I think that will be a huge thing for them, as a sort of a follow-up to that. I hope the league addresses some of the tricks that Draymond Green and Steph Curry particularly have perfected in terms of, jumping into the defender and, all of that kind of stuff. And they really start to think about this stuff that Golden State has sort of perfected in terms of drawing fouls in ways that aren't necessarily fair to the defender or anything along those lines. So that's just kind of a side note, but I think that will be it. Yeah, I know. Exactly. That'll be a huge thing for them. And then the other adjustment is, again, I think figuring out that third piece offensively is really, I think, going to be important, and getting Gasol to step up and be more assertive and more of an alpha rather than, doing a little spin pass, wide open layup and passing it up. I mean, there's a certain point of being too selfless. And you see that a little bit with the Raptors right now. As I love how much they're passing and they're being praised for their passing, but at some point you just got to kind of put your head down and go to the rim and attack. So
it's an interesting Gasol point because there was a moment in the last round of Lakers title winning where Pau Gasol actually had to change his game in the playoffs from being facilitator to Kobe and to others to being dominant post player. That really was a big reason why the Lakers were able to win back-to-back titles in that Kobe Gasol combination. So I don't know, maybe it's a family thing there too.
I think it's interesting too in the sense of like they're already down Looney. I mean, he's definitely not playing next game. If you can use Gasol to get Cousins in foul trouble, that's going to be huge. So that's another thing I think they really need to figure out how to attack Cousins as much as. Yeah, exactly, and it happened pretty quickly. So I think continue to sort of encourage Gasol to be assertive and draw him into fouls.
But getting Cousins in foul trouble, I think, has more to do with the point guards than it does to do with your center. It's you need Lowry and you need Van Vliet to really be aggressive at attacking the rim. So that way they have to sort of collapse and try and block some shots and start putting your body into him underneath the basket as well.
Cousins got in foul trouble in Game 2 last night, except they had the luxury of James Looney or Kevin Looney that they now don't have. So again, I like the word Greg used, threshold. Like it's gonna be interesting to see like where Golden State's threshold lies and how close they get or pass to it.
Well, Greg, you had said, when for the Raptors, the adjustment they need to make is they need to put when they have their foot on the Golden State's throat, they need to really make sure they close it out. I just want to point out that in the last 23 playoff series Golden State have played in, only one team has successfully done that, winning 4 games against them. Right. So it's a lot easier said than done. Right. In the last 23 series they played in, only one team has won 4 games against them. And that team that
took a dick punch.
That took a couple things, right? It took Draymond getting tossed and suspended, and it also took again a series-saving play from LeBron James, which if he doesn't make that block, I mean, okay, well, history retrospect. Okay, Mike, on to you. Adjustments that need to be made by Toronto, by Golden State to play out the rest of the series.
Golden State is going to have to find a way to stop the run and gun because I think the Raptors are going to come out of this game running and gunning, and they're going to try again. When you have a hobbled team beside you, you have to grab the rebound. You got to headband that ball as fast as you can and try to score quick and easy baskets. And the Raptors were able to do that in Game 1 with Siakam, especially, and they didn't do it very well in Game 2. And that's something that they're going to have to be better at doing. I think the Raptors' adjustments defensively, I think, is going to depend on who's playing in the game and at what point. But I think the Raptors have been playing good defense, and in that last game, they took 12 more shots than Golden State and still lost the game. Right? They had 12 more possessions because of of defense, rebound, steals. So it's again, I think if they continue to play this type of defense and they make a little bit more in the way of shooting, I think that they can definitely win the next game. They have to not allow Golden State a chance to go off. They got to come out and punch them in the face in the third quarter and have a big run and put the game away in the same sort of fashion. They can't come out flat-footed, and I don't think that they will. I think they're actually going to do a much better job in Game 3 of doing all of those things against Golden State. And if you're Golden State, I guess is the other side of that question. You're going to have to try to find a way to get Steph Curry open, because you need him to score a lot of points this next coming game, because the more points he scores, the more open everybody else on that team is going to be, regardless if he's the only shooter that's there. He's going to have to find a way to shoot better than, the 35% that he scored in the last game. He's got to be better than 3 of 10 from 3-point land than he was in Game 2. He's going to have to find a way to be much, much better, or else it's not going to matter. He's going to have to, that was a very quiet 23 points that he scored. So
okay, let's go around the table then and get our sort of closing thoughts. How do you see this series playing itself by the time we know there's going to be a Game 5? So how do you see the series playing itself out? Where are we going to be at by the time we get to Game 5, or just your thoughts? Closing thoughts here for each person. We'll go around. Blair, to you first. Closing thoughts.
I think if I had to predict the series is going to be split coming back for Game 5. Just my intuition, I guess. Two last thoughts. One, the veterans got to step up for Toronto. Danny Green still, obviously. Ibaka was mostly a non-factor. He played brainlessly in Game 2, took himself out of the game with foul trouble. Kyle Lowry did some of the same thing. Van Vliet, as we said, filled in admirably. But I thought a lot of Van Vliet's shots came up short near the end of the game, and part of that might have been in virtue of the fact that he had played a lot more minutes.
38 minutes.
Yeah, Gasol, we've talked about him being inconsistent, and what I said about him guarding Cousins and getting the wind knocked out of him repeatedly. And one thing Toronto needs to do, because I didn't mention this before, but it's a closing thought, because I thought it was a serious problem at numerous intervals during the game last night, especially when they were using Curry as a screener. But even at other times, Toronto got caught on a lot of bad switches underneath or the free throw line a lot. And there were a lot of times when Golden State had their 4 or 5 man matched up right and underneath the rim in the restricted area with one of the guards on them. And I don't know what they need to do, but the Toronto needs to adjust that, because if Bogut capitalized for a bunch of them, if you remember near the end of the game, the two alley-oops, and a lot of those, if you look, they had gotten caught in bad rotations under the free throw line, and it was Van Vliet or Lowry or somebody else on them. And if they don't fix that, the injuries aren't going to be as big of a problem for Golden State. But I do still think they'll split the games in Oakland. But don't underestimate the Oracle factor either. We haven't brought that up. These are the last games in Oracle. And there's no way the fans are going to come out as intense as the Toronto fans have been. But the players and the fans included, there will be times in these games and the ones if coming back to Oakland when that will be a big factor that the Raptors have to face up against as well.
Well, that is true, because apparently there's been a new record set for ticket prices in NBA playoffs at the Oracle. Yahoo reporting that even the ridiculous prices Raptors fans were playing have now been outpaced by Golden State fans.
I won't clap.
Mike, what about you? How do you see it, final thoughts? How do you see it playing out?
I think that the Raptors should actually win Game 3 and Game 4. They should actually be coming home up 3-1. But kind of just like, Golden State's happy going home, limping home with a 1-1. I think the Raptors would be happy with that too, because, as we've mentioned in this podcast of how, how the idea, the psyche of home court advantage matters. And if the Raptors win one of two, then, they protect home court and they're champions. So I think there's something to be said about coming back 1-1. I think the Raptors have the ability and they have the situation of a hobbled opponent who, as we've said, coming out of that Portland series, it wasn't as dominant as it looked, as we had mentioned before, right? That was a series where they were down multiple games to an opponent that wasn't at its full strength, and they found a way to win, but it didn't look very convincing, and they haven't looked very convincing in this series either. The Raptors should come home 3-1, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was a 2-2 sort of thing.
Wow, $50,000 a ticket. That's the new record. Someone bought two pair of tickets for Game 3. $50,000 per ticket. Greg, final thoughts from you on the? Yeah. True story. Final thoughts from you, Greg.
I will be interested to see if Nick Nurse makes any adjustments to the starting lineup. I think you raise an interesting point, and to see how long they stick with Danny Green. But yeah, let's not forget the fact that they're up against a dynasty and a great team in a tough arena. So I really think my gut again does tell me 1-1, but obviously it's going to be easier said than done to do that. But I think the Raptors have proven that they're a tough team and resilient, and that they're not just tough in terms of motor, but in terms of mentally. So 1-1, and I will be interested to see how those what sort of adjustments they do make in terms of rotations and things like that over the next couple of games, and it'll be exciting to see.
Yeah. So thank you to all of you for your points and for jumping in the Worldwide Roundtable. It's my brother Mike and Greg Mason and Blair Miller, and you can find them all on Twitter at TF Quarter, at Voteria Hoops, and at Michael Gennaro. And all good points, and all probably true. But here's what I want to close with: 8 quarters of basketball we've seen between the Toronto Raptors and the Golden State Warriors. Golden State's only won 2 quarters. They won the third quarter in Game 1, and they won the third quarter in Game 2. In Game 1, they came out punching in the third quarter like they have all playoffs long, and Toronto responded and punched back. In Game 2, Toronto looked a little bit lackadaisical in those moments. Now, you can point to the early referee calls and the fouls that maybe moved them one direction. You can point to fatigue. You can point to naivety. You can point to missed shots. But whatever it may be, when the game ended at the end of Game 2, there was no doubt that although the score was 1-1, Toronto was the better team across the first 2 games, and it wasn't even close. And if we look at the last round against a better team, Milwaukee, the best team in the NBA all season long, the team that had home court, were the number 1 seed with the MVP and the best player and their entire lineup. Toronto, at the end of 2 games, trailed 0-2, having lost the game they should have won and having got blown out across 4 quarters. And then something turned in the series. Yes, there were individual moments where Milwaukee was punching and looked like it could have gone back their way. But there was a resilience within this team to fight defensively and offensively in a way that they would not be denied. And not only did they win 3 straight against Milwaukee, a feat that no other team had done the entire season, they won 4 straight against Milwaukee, winning games both at home and on the road. And as we look back on that series, it is clear that Toronto was the better team in that series across the entire series, regardless of the fact that Milwaukee took 2 games. And I feel like we're at that exact same moment right now in the Golden State series. Yes, Kevin Durant could come back, and that changes everything. I will not dispute that point whatsoever. Clay could be healthy. Clay could not be healthy. Other guys may return or may not return. But one thing is obvious, is that 2 games into this series, the Toronto Raptors right now are the best team in the NBA right now at this moment. Now, in order to turn that into the trophy, they have to do the business. And the question is, will they be able to do the business? But if you told me they go to Oakland and they lose both games in Oakland, I will be very surprised by that, because I don't think that's this team. And you say, well, Golden State has experience, but this Toronto team has experience as well. And the experiences of the fans are not the same as the experiences of the players. We are a shattered fan base of losers. We are a fan base who is lost in all of our sports for many of years. But the players on this team are not the same makeup. This team is led by Kawhi Leonard, who has not only won a ring, he has won the Finals MVP. Right? This is a different team with a different leadership, and there are a lot of winners on this team. And yes, you may say, well, they won at 9. They won the D League as the 905. Yes, they did. But Siakam and Van Vliet, like these guys, they have been in spots where they have won before. Marc Gasol has won an Olympic gold medal. Like these are players who have been in moments where they have come to the forefront and they have won games. I do not see this team losing both games in Oakland. I will be very surprised, and I've been wrong many times before if they do. And I would not be surprised to see Toronto win both games in Oakland. I would not be surprised if the game that they lost in Toronto is the only game they lose for the rest of the season. A little bit wishful, a little bit strong of a push, absolutely. But certainly there's been enough evidence up until this point to show you that this Toronto Raptors team can do it. The question is, will they be the Raptors who beat Milwaukee, or will they be the Raptors who barely beat Philly? And we'll find out based on who else steps up and makes shots. Okay, until next time, thanks for listening. This has been the Worldwide Roundtable. I'm Phdsteve, your host. Hey, listen to me. This is very important. No matter what you do, no matter what anybody says, be nice to each other. Be nice to your bus driver. Peace.
I don't know. Either I'm off my nut or he is. Or you are. Is that your final answer?
Damn, I'm good! Can you feel that? Huh? Can you feel it, Captain Compost?
I can hardly contain myself.
You know, before this is over, I'm gonna need a whole lot of serious therapy. Man, I'm tired of being right.
Inconceivable!